free to also join us again at 4 p.m. this afternoon, PST now.
Yes, and both sessions will be recorded, and I'll post both sessions in Azure Advisors and also on our YouTube channel. So if you don't make one, you'll still be able to review the recording.
Okay, so with that, like what we do with this Q&A is it's a chance for you to ask us anything that's on your mind about Service Fabric. We post questions in the IAM window, and we'll cover any topic that you want to talk about, to the best of our abilities, given the crowd of people we have here today. All of us, are PMs from the Service Fabric product team. For those new people who are joining us today, so post your questions away, and then we'll see. We'll start answering them.
Let's go. Can they hear?
Sudama said he couldn't hear us.
Oh,
maybe no one can hear us.
Can anyone hear us?
Okay. It was awfully quiet. So
yeah, we can open it up with one thing we can mention is that if you haven't seen it yet, we posted the 6.1 release 2 weeks ago. That's available now across 4 regions. We posted a corresponding SDK to go with that as well. And as you can imagine, we're working on 6.2
and Visual Studio tooling.
And the Visual Studio tooling that went with that as well. If you'll see the blog post announcement for that. And there's some other exciting things inside there, such as DevTest Labs, where you can now launch a Service Fabric cluster inside DevTest Labs and use it based on the resources you have inside DevTest Labs. That was something else we did inside there. So there are a number of other things inside that blog posted for that announcement.
So if you have questions, post them in the IAM window. And Marcin, here we go.
Question about AZs. Jocko, that's back for you.
Oh, what is it?
The question is, what do you think about running Service Fabric over 2 AZs from North Europe, or 3 AZs from West Europe, and get 5 fault domains this way?
So looks like this is not a new question to me from Marcin. So thank you for asking this question. So my take on this one is AZs are a way to survive a failure of one region. So the fact that you're choosing 3 out of 2 from a region itself says that you know something more than Azure does. So you're saying that the 2 you chose are more resilient than the other one. But if you were just thinking about AZs as a better fault domain than a rack, then yes, it will work. So that gets to the next question which you have, which just happens to be, what's the minimum configuration you need for this one? So depending on what fault characteristics you want, you can range from all the way from 5 to 15 as the minimum. So as long as you do that, I think you'll be fine. Yeah, platinum is reliability. Sounds good. Okay, we're good with this. Okay, Dimitri asks about, can you tell more about managed SF service you're planning to build?
We can only say that we're actually building it. The best thing to do actually is that we kind of advise you that if you want to find out more about Managed Service Fabric that we're building, you can join our Azure Advisors and our Service Fabric Advisors Forum. Mark is the person who sort of manages this. He'll post that. Inside there, because it's an NDA thing and there's we're having to talk about, that's where we have to have those discussions. In a public community forum like this is mostly focused on the products we have today.
It works really awesome. All processes attached to Visual Studio, attached to all the processes spawned, and it's really great.
You should post a blog post about it, yes?
Actually, I would like to hear, I don't want to take up too much time on the call. I don't want to take too much time for other people, but I'd love to hear from you offline a little bit more on how you're making use of that, because that's, I mean, right now that was sort of it's a trick that that we do in our tooling to make
Yes.
debugging a little bit easier and integrated with the tooling. But I'm curious to hear how you've been able to make use of it. Maybe there's something we can expand on.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little
Okay.
bit more? Yeah, I'd love to hear
Okay.
about that.
So I will drop you an email, okay?
Yes, please do,
Yeah.
for sure.
And of course, you you point to the DubF as well, which is a hangover from many, many years ago
Yes,
when it was Windows Fabric.
yes.
That's how ancient that thing is. Not SF.
Or it could be just works fine.
Oh,
Works
yeah,
fine,
works fine,
yeah.
yes.
Works
But
fine.
yes, that was the hook that you have between our.
Wow, this is,
Look at that.
yes.
There you go.
Way to think on your feet, Mikkel.
But yes, we'd love to hear, there was
That would be good.
an awesome
Yeah,
piece of work
works
we
fine.
did many years ago to hook into the tooling and give you a great debugging experience.
New offering.
New offering, works fine.
Works fine.
Works fantastic.
It's not like.
Fantastic.
Fantastic might be a little bit too much.
Maybe too much.
Fine is.
That creating clusters through the portal now will only create you secure clusters. And we hopefully, I would love feedback on this, by the way. We hopefully made it extremely easy now for you to be able to go through the portal, and it generates a self-signed cert for you, which it puts inside a Key Vault. It allows you to download that self-signed cert, and then it will reference that self-signed cert in securing the cluster itself, as well as the communication to the cluster. Yeah, this is a big drive, as you can imagine, now to make sure that secure by default is a strong emphasis across many things. If you look back even earlier this year, we had a lot of let's say security issues generally coming across the industry. So we've been working towards this well. So that's one thing that we've done. Those certs, by the way, are self-signed certs, and you shouldn't really use them in production. And I think we give them a year expiry around them all. But getting onto your question about also cert rollover, one thing that we're rolling out in the month of March is we've been working closely for a while now with the Key Vault team, and they published a preview of an extension called a Key Vault extension, which you can download nowadays. And the Key Vault extension uses what's called Managed Service Identities, or MSI, and you can search for that inside Azure to get the identity. This is the MSI identity of the VM to communicate up to the Key Vault to do auto cert rollover of all your certs. Now, of course, you'll use that with all the certs for the cluster itself, but it doesn't stop you also using its certs for the applications that you deploy across them. Of course, the limitation right now is that it's at the machine level itself, which means that you can have different certs and a different Key Vault extension on a per VM scale set basis. So you can have list of certs for VM scale set 1 for that node type, and this one for this VM scale set. But there's basically an expectation that you're pulling down all the certs onto the VMs where you expect it to. And I think this is actually a super exciting feature because it solves this problem enormously.
That would be also for me very big change, because I have a huge script, huge PowerShell script and huge ARM template that generates certificates using Let's Encrypt and stuff like that, and Key Vault, and then runs the ARM template with different parameters to do different steps of the certificate rollover. So I call the ARM template with first set of parameters, then with the second, and then with the third. So that would be a huge simplification, because I can end up with one call to one ARM template. So that's huge.
Yeah, and I would add more to this. The one thing I'd add to this as well, just as a best practice, in our discussions with Azure security team, they've pointed out that so today we pull a lot of the certificates down by thumbprint, but we're also going to be supporting common name.
Common name.
And so we strongly advise you to use common name for the certificate, because it allows you to then, and you should then go and, in production, let's say it's perfectly fine for your dev clusters and your pre-production clusters to use self-signed certs, but for your production clusters, using the common name and rolling over based on the common name, where you have, my website / markswebsite.com is the way to go. We've also been advised by the Azure security team that subject alternate name is also a strong guidance that should be used as a more secure way of that. So ultimately, we'll also be subject alternate name as another way of pulling down those certs, particularly for your production environments. So when you go off and buy your production cert, those are the ways that you should identify the cert when you do the rollover from Key Vault.
Yeah, I would say CN and alternate CN, both of them work. And like you can use it today in prod. And the main reason for doing that is because then even if your certificate expires, you can actually rekindle your cluster by just rolling out a new certificate which is valid. And it just comes back up. Today, if your certificate expires, then you end up calling CSS and they in turn call us. And then we do some background magic. So strongly encourage people to go towards using CNs, the common names.
Okay, good, great question. We have another question posted since. Of course, the ultimate direction as well as we walk towards this thing is, I was expecting someone to ask, will there be MSI available at the application level? And, that's one future direction that we will go as well, so that you can deploy certs with a set of applications, and then the certs only get deployed when the application deploys with the VM. So, that's the way that we'll also be going that direction. Is Service Fabric a flawless product?
What?
Someone else.
Is that a real question?
No.
Service Fabric volume driver, FS level or block level? That's a good question. I think the one that we're planning is essentially it'll be at the block level.
So does it mean that you are using some kind of store port driver or virtual mini port driver to connect to the because it must be somehow loaded into operating system to be able to mount this driver, yes, and this driver is somewhere on the network or on the provided by some other service. So it's a really huge amount of work to do such a thing.
So the question is,
I think your question is block drivers are hard? Yes, they are.
My question is this going to be yet another kernel driver in the Service Fabric beside the transaction log and lease layer?
I'll have to probably check on the answer to that.
I think those is yes.
Yeah, I think it is.
a full mode driver.
Yeah.
We have one today, so it's based upon our current storage technology, where we have a kernel mode driver that does transactional storage across there that's doing block level writes on top of that. So yes, is the answer to that for sure.
So Marcia, there are two of them, right? Today there's a lease layer and then there's a KTL driver. You rightly pointed out. I don't know whether we'll have a third one, but we'll just follow
It's
on.
based upon that. But it's interesting to talk about the volume drivers that we are building. Yes, we're building 3 volume drivers. Yes, we're building. That's the direction.
So the idea is to have a volume driver for Azure files. There will be another volume driver for attaching managed disks, and finally, for your high availability, super fast data, we'll also have the Service Fabric volume driver, which is using the reliable collections underneath it.
And that's, of course, if you're not on Azure, that's going to be your obvious choice too, because you'll want local storage for the volume driver instead of Azure backed storage. But if you're in the Azure environment, the Azure backed storage is always going to be a choice there too.
Is this Azure Managed Disk driver going to be limited by the number of disks that underlying node can mount? Because there are limits like, for example, 16 disks, 16 managed disks or something like that. Because I believe that it would be completely different architecture and it would require some connection to the underlying XStore and stuff like that. So it's getting
yeah. So on the managed disk, yes, today they do have hard constraints on the number of disks that can be attached to a VM. So we are working with the storage team, and so they do plan to relax that constraint in order for us to actually able to run multiple containers on the same VM, with each being attached to a different disk. So we are working with them. So this is a collaborative exercise with the storage team that we have.
Thanks. That sounds like a really awesome piece of technology.
we have any other sort of, I mean, we're willing to take any form of question from a newbie question, like, from things that you're finding. Yeah, I'd love to hear some feedback on whether people have tried anything with Service Fabric secure clusters and feedback on that. Did it cause you?
Does anyone know a successful port of a function runtime inside of SF? Wondering if anyone has done this before we dive in.
Well, yes, the way we've done this today, I mean, the way you have to do this today is you can take the function runtime and you can host it inside a container.
Yeah, that actually was done.
And that was
did a
done.
good prototype of that.
Yeah, in fact, we can probably put a blog post up about that. There's an example of how they just run it. I think they just run it as a container itself. So
yeah, and I think even the functions documentation has pointed to that as well. How you can just take it and run it on Service Fabric.
So
what are you looking to do, TJ, specifically? Is it are you looking for functions as just kind of something to sit alongside other applications you have on a Service Fabric cluster, or is there something else you're going for?
I'm specifically thinking about using function as a nice extensibility point for customer provided extensibility point. I mean, if we have our tenants, I would like them to not use the Service Fabric application model, but the more simple function model, but to have all this hosted inside Service Fabric to make it independent. From the rest of infrastructure, which is the biggest benefit of Service Fabric. So, like an extensibility point for our customers.
Yeah, okay. And so, and TJ, in your case, it sounds like you're basically looking for something platform agnostic. So you want to write an application that will run on whatever the underlying platform is.
Yeah, I knew that the functions team divide this into two things. There's the functions runtime itself, and then there's a piece of infrastructure that they also have that does sort of the eventing and notification around things.
Exactly. So if you've got, for example,
and I know in talking to them that they're looking at how they can host that thing inside a container independently of the functions environment that runs on top of app service today. So then you can have the sort of notification feedback environment hosted in the container, and then the container, and then the function code that you want to run and its runtime in a separate container, and those two together get deployed into whatever environment you want, independent of running it inside app servers or whatever they have, or the web jobs environment that they've hosted today. So that's certainly something that they think about and the direction they're going. So yes, I actually was talking to the functions team about this topic yesterday. Very thing. But I can't speak on top of the functions team and things. But yeah, that's certainly the objective they want to do. They want to make functions more agnostic and available across a number of different environments you want to run it in, not just inside app service and the web jobs where it is today.
It's a quiet day. This is the quietest day that we've ever had.
Yeah. Right, so in a 5 to 6 node cluster, what's the best way to go? Best way to
set up fewer than 5 upgrade domains.
Why would you want fewer than 5 upgrade domains? Faster deploys.
So in Azure, you don't have a choice. So at this point, that is what we give you. That's mainly to make sure that when you think about a 5-node cluster, you should also think that there are different operations which are performed at the infrastructure layer which we don't control. Like, for example, if at the bottom half of that stack, if the VMs have to be moved, or for example, the VM has to be reimaged, so those will be always orchestrated UD by UD. So if you end up having, say, for example, the Azure infrastructure always considers 5, and we end up considering only 2. Will be interesting in that point is they will take down more than a quorum of machines. Like in case of 5, if they take down 3 at a time or 2 at a time, you're going to lose the cluster and also your availability of your applications, and that's why 5. So in order to come to asking about what can I do to make my deployment go faster? So we actually have in our runtime knobs which will basically will ignore help if that is what we want to do. So if your ask is that we go and enable that for Azure clusters, it's an ask. It's a very simple thing to go and enable, but so far we've chosen not to because we've always positioned reliability over anything else.
Well, you can tweak it. You can tweak the times it takes to do
You can't change the timings.
So then the question, yes, so I just want to get there. So then what can you do about the wait times between UDs? So those, we have some norms. It still is, as you said, it just still bubbles through 5. And if you're trying to say I'm a stateless app, I don't really care about availability, I just want to blast it out. That is something which runtime provides. We have not provided it at the Azure level just for safety reasons. But if there is a demand for it, then we can just enable it. Basically, there is an unmonitored auto as an option, which we don't allow. Yeah, only monitored. So this has come up multiple times. So I'm just saying, if there is an ask like this, then we can start to say yes if that can be an option.
I see. Right.
Remember, we used to have.
But there's a time, but on the monitored one where you do have health timeout checks between when the rollout is completed in the FD and before you move into the FD, you can alter the times there.
Yeah, they're 0 now.
And I see.
They're already 0.
So it's already at the fastest rollout that you can do across Azure for monitored health checks.
Correct.
Inside those domains today.
Yeah, you can choose not to. You can disable everything, and that's one option which we have not provided.
Yeah.
But if there's a demand like that, we can certainly do
Yeah,
it.
you just have to be careful between the reliability of what you're rolling out and if you do things too fast.
Oh, but see, Michael says that he likes the rolling upgrades.
Yeah, I mean, this is why even in Azure itself, we have very, very careful when we roll out and across regions, and we do take our time, especially on the first one, that we don't do things too fast, because you don't want to. You want to be careful as you go through each upgrade domain to make sure that you've been successful when you move on to the next. So you want to start off slow and then speed up at the end and feel more confident, especially
Yes.
with the first FDs.
And then there are other things which we are considering as well. And you guys already talked about the serverless offering. Once you get there, then there are the choices of all those things which will be yours. But before then, we also talked about, are there things you can combine together and so forth. Those are still in the design stages. So at this point, I think if the ask is to go for unmonitored, we can still talk about that.
And to your question about how can you kind of take a look at what's going on with the upgrade to see if there's something that's taking a long time, I just posted a link to, there's a troubleshooting doc that gives you some commands you can run through PowerShell that'll give you a lot of information about the state of the upgrade that it's currently in, so you can see what's happening. That gives you all the different time wait durations and all that. So that'll give you a little bit of visibility into it.
Okay, so there's this question. It seems that Cosmos DB, which runs on top of Service Fabric, can do repartitioning. So
We skipped one.
Oh, did we? Sorry.
Yeah.
Let's go back to Rich. He says, how does service affinity constraints work in partition stateful service? Each replica partition is positioned together on the same node.
Well, so the constraints, at least, the constraints are usually going to be node type constraints or node level constraints. So the general rule is that we don't place replicas of the same partition on the same node. So if you apply constraints to a partition that would force that, then Service Fabric will complain at you saying, well, you've asked me to do something that I'm not supposed to do. And so then it'll kind of get into a state where it's waiting for you to undo that. It'll basically, you'll get this warning that says, I can't place these replicas anywhere because you've constrained me to one fault domain, for example, and I need to strike them across multiple fault domains. Affinity I'm less familiar with. Jocko, is that something you know more about?
No, I think it is.
Or is that more of a Mac question?
It's a Mac question.
Yeah.
Affinity is, you can say these two replicas should be attempted to be placed together.
Yeah.
And so you can put an affinity constraint to say when you place these two replicas, but they're usually replicas from different services.
Different services. So,
For different partitions.
and it is also
partitions, yeah.
it is also not hard. Like in the sense there are soft constraints and there are hard constraints. Affinity is actually a soft constraint, so we try our best to keep it together, but if they may not. So
Let's dig out to.
Anyway, we can have Matt respond to it in an email. So
Or come back at 4 o'clock if you want to answer that.
yeah, smart Matt will be there.
Yeah. The guy that works on this stuff will be here at 4, and he'll
Right.
answer them there.
And if you can't make it to the 4 o'clock session, well, we'll have Matt answer this on the recording, so you'll find it there.
Okay, what's the next question?
Let's see. I've been trying to move my service from .NET 4.5.2 to NetStandard 2.0. So you can play on Linux. Had difficulties getting hosting working since system.service model isn't. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so if you're moving to NetStandard 2.0, you're going to have to essentially ditch WCF and move to, I would suggest HTTP is usually the best choice. We do have a remoting protocol built in that does work with NetStandard 2.0, which is kind of in the same it's in the same spirit of WCF's NetTCP. So you can take a look at service remoting if you want that kind of strongly coupled communication with an interface, the shared interface that's available. But otherwise, you'll have to switch over to HTTP or something different. So most of the time, we see HTTP is the best choice if you're on NetStandard 2.0 or if you're trying to target .NET Core.
Are you considering providing container networking and volume mounts to classic service fabric applications? By classic, I mean I guess you mean service fabric applications. So the answer is yes. So we do plan to. We already support container networking in terms of open networks on service fabric clusters, and we will be supporting volume. We already support volume drivers there, but there aren't a whole lot available today. So a couple of them that we are working on seeks to fix that, especially on Windows. So the answer is yes.
So I will not need to use any containers. I will not be forced to use Docker containers and stuff. I can use the awesome Service Fabric application.
I see. Okay. So the answer right now, so the answer to that, currently we are only planning to support this for containers. The volume drivers are and the networking concepts are intrinsic container concepts. So as of now, we are only thinking of supporting containers there.
Because it's the containers are really just a concept. The underlying primitives used underneath the VM compute, DLL, and stuff like that allows to provide all these services without using containers. And this is moreover a question if I should adopt the containers, or can I keep using the Service Fabric application model, which I think is so good and so well designed, and I like it much more than Docker and all the stuff like that. So, but I don't want to be on the second class citizen with my love to the Service Fabric application model. If you understand what I mean.
Yeah, I hear you, but some of these things, like with networking, doing it for containers was it's a lot simpler than doing it for processes, because there is no way to guarantee the IP for a process and stuff like that. So if you were to do, for example, isolated network, there's not really a whole lot that we can do to ensure that this process cannot reach into another network, because the process can pretty much do what it wants. So containers, because they provide some level of isolation, that's why it makes some of these things simpler when it comes to networking. So for networking, I am not quite sure if we will, I can go back and check again, but I don't think that's in our roadmap right now. Now, when it comes to volume mounts, at the end of the day, like once you have the driver, you're just mapping. Now that again, this gets into a little bit of a so once you have a driver, you can map something to the VM host, because if you're running a process, you can obviously map something to the VM host, and your process can always write to that particular directory. So you can even write it to your work directory, and you can kind of use that as as a place to actually put stuff in from your process. Now, so that's kind of there already, and when it moves, we are going to be actually replicating a lot of these things. So your data is already there. So you're getting replication because you're using Service Fabric concepts already. Now, if you're talking about using something like managed disks and Azure files, and you want to get the same sort of experience with processes as opposed to containers or something. Pardon?
Should we take this offline?
Yeah, I think we should talk about this a little more offline and see what we can do.
Okay, let's move on.
You got that one from Rich?
The one on Cosmos DB?
Yeah.
So the Cosmos DB one, it says Cosmos DB seems to do repartitioning data at a certain scale point. I wasn't aware that they actually did do that, unless someone else knows otherwise. I don't think they shared how that's accomplished. Is this something into one of reliable collections? Not really. Is it something that's lower level? Yes, it is. And how is it done logically? We've understood how to do repartitioning of data for sort of a number of years. It's just kind of been getting, and we actually continue to actually investigate and look at this and actually even sort of actively work on it. But we have got no real time frame to how we can talk about what this. There's no details I can publish or talk about how Cosmos DB have done this. They will have taken advantage of some of the very low level APIs inside Service Fabric if they have done this. Maybe they've done it in a different way. Certainly it's a direction that we continue to invest in as well, though, because we recognize the fact that when you want to be able to have a single data store, you don't have to think about the partitioning of the data inside it and let that partitioning happen for you. So I can't really comment on.
So this work actually we are actively doing. I think I don't want to give out a 6.2 or 6.3 date or any of those things. But at this point, we are doing two things. One, giving you the ability to do splitting of your partitions or merging your partitions. That's the work which we're doing. The same logic will be applied for supporting replicas across, for example, regions and so forth. The same scenario, the same logic. For example, when a partition has to keep track of where each of these secondaries are, they don't have to be in sync. So that's the same logic which we are applying, and I think when Matt is here, maybe next time around in a month's time, we can actually give you a little bit more on that. But basically, Cosmos DB team did work with us long back in terms of how to do it, and I think it looks like they'd implemented it before we did. But ours is coming too. I just don't have a specific date for you at this point.
Yes. Okay, do you have any idea how to do data package rolling upgrade without a forced restart with containers?
Like if you're in a container,
Well, the data it should work the same way. The container is just another code package.
Yeah.
So if you do what we call a differential upgrade, which is basically you create a package output. So when you compile your application, you create a package output that only includes the data package, doesn't include the code package, which is where you define your container. And then you roll it out that way. It should be the same as whether you're in a container or not, because we'll basically just ignore the code package, which is what points to your container. So you shouldn't see a restart there. The trick is to construct that application package, that differential package, correctly. So where you only have the data package in there and the version number for the data package is increased, but the version number for all the other packages has stayed the same in your service manifest. But other than that, it should work just the same way, and your container shouldn't restart.
Yeah, and your code package, since container is your code package, it's just downloaded on Docker Hub from Docker Hub or from container registry. It's on the VM. So.
Okay, so this question now. Are there any tips or tricks for getting access to more verbose logs? I want to see trace logs for more information with the Service Fabric exception and no idea to look further. Side note, troubleshooting with VSTS, automated build, deploy in our application. on our first secured cluster. And so we're graced with more information, and we're graced with the ever so informative error one or more errors have occurred.
VSTS troubleshooting. The best thing you can do is to make sure whenever you run a build or deploy, you can enable debug logging in VSTS. It's basically a variable you set on your build and deploy scripts. What are they called? They're called templates, tasks,
Build definition.
definitions. Thank you.
Yes.
So both for the build and the release definition, there's a variable you can set, which I think is system.debug, and just set that to true. That will give you some verbose logging for running those definitions in the individual. So the individual task will spit out verbose information. So definitely do that for VSTS.
So the more detailed logs you're looking for. So there are ETW events that are emitted by Service Fabric. So we essentially have three things that we emit. There's the cluster level operational events, and that gives you all the information about what the cluster is doing with your application. At the most verbose level, it's giving you details on the decisions it's making. A lot of that is not really useful for you because it's just kind of showing you how the cluster arrived at a decision, but it's kind of hard to parse out. But there are additional things in there, like when an application restarts, when an application is moved, or when a replica is moved. And then there are higher level ones at the reliable services level, which are probably the most beneficial to you. So those are all things that we pump out to ETW all the time. So the trick is you just have to make sure those ETW events are picked up and then sent somewhere where you can view them. So if you're on your local development environment in Visual Studio, there's that diagnostics event window which will just show you everything that comes out through ETW, as long as you put in the ETW sources. And so the names of those sources you can get from our documentation. You can do something very similar in an Azure environment by setting up application insights. And then when you configure your cluster, your ARM template, you effectively do the same thing as you did in Visual Studio. You say which of those ETW streams do you want to send to application insights, and at what verbosity level do you want to send them to. So that's just a thing that you configure. And I'll post a link to some documentation in the window here that'll.
I'll post a link to the overview documentation. I think our guidance really comes down to, certainly locally inside Visual Studio, you can see all those ETWs in the diagnostics log window. But on your cluster, you should really set up App Insights as a place to push some of your application logs to for ETW and get that configured and set up. And we have guidance inside our docs to describe how to do that.
But that is what you do though. If you need to see detailed diagnostic information, that's the place to go. It's that ETW, those ETW channels. That's where all that stuff gets written out to. So you really just want to capture that.
I admit that we're probably not clear about what we mean by which logs. We probably need to clear that up.
Yeah.
Okay, let's keep going. What's the timeline for upgrading Service Fabric relays, classic Service Fabric relays to ARM? Are you talking about service bus here? When you say Service Fabric relays, there used to be, a service bus has relays built into it all, so if you're asking about that, otherwise I'm not too sure what topic you're talking about.
He said yes.
Oh. That's a question on the service bus team.
Yeah.
So we can ping them and ask them. Probably one of the first services ever built inside Azure. I don't know. We'll ask the service bus team. Reach out to Dan Rossanova and ask him. Okay, are there plans to enhance the tooling for the cluster state backup? I'd like to have something where we can have SQL Server backup completely managed by the portal and transparent to my application. We're currently working to define our backup strategy for our cluster. What is the impact on the actor while the state is being backed up? Is the actor actually being locked?
Yeah, so there is work being done for backup. So today it's kind of it's an API you call to run backups, and then there's another API call to run restores. We're trying to automate that a little bit better by providing backup and restore as a service. So that'll kind of run all the time, and then you can configure it to take incremental backups or periodic backups. So it'll be a little bit easier to manage because it'll kind of run as a service. The question about actors, it shouldn't actually lock an actor up when it's doing a backup. That shouldn't happen. So you should still be able to take a request at the same time. The timeline for the backup restore service, I'm not entirely sure. I think it's getting pretty close, but I can't say for sure.
But if
But I think we're
you're willing to do a private preview for us, let us know. We will give you the code.
Yeah,
To do it.
I mean, I think we're getting close on this.
That's close.
But I think that
So yeah.
there's been a few more challenges to it than we expected.
Yes.
Because we've been talking about this now, certainly the last quarter of last year, we started to talk about it a bit more. And we're getting close. I think we're still doing a lot of testing around it all, that's the thing.
Yeah,
We're running into a lot of edge cases.
Yeah, anything which you guys can help to, like, make this out, that'll be great. So
maybe we should set
Yeah.
them up a little
Yeah.
more formally. We want to
No.
try to do a preview for it.
yeah, I mean, or just send us an email. We'll send you a document.
Yeah.
That's fine too.
Okay.
Anyone is fine.
Yeah.
We just need help.
So there's a question here about configuring. The default way of configuring service applications is through settings, XML, and overriding through application parameters. And you like the ASP.NET Core one a lot better. So I tend to kind of agree with you. The ASP.NET Core one's quite nice. I'll point you to a blog that Mike Wasson did that shows you how to actually hook up the ASP.NET Core configuration to that settings XML. So you can read it through those ASP.NET Core APIs, but still put things in settings XML. So that's one thing you can do. Whether or not the config settings you can actually do in JSON or in settings XML. So the interesting thing about the configuration packages where that settings XML file lives is you can actually put any file you want in there at all. So it's really that's just a directory full of files, and we call that a package that's upgraded as a unit and versioned as a unit. But you can put any files you want in there. The settings XML is one that we provide an API to in C#. So you can read those values out through a C# API, and we give you some additional capability on top of it, like the application parameter overrides and encryption features. But if you just want a JSON file or something, you can just dump a JSON file in there, and it'll get carried around with your config package. The way you then read the contents of that file is you literally get a file handle to the file, and then you just parse it yourself and read it out. So you lose some of the capability, but if you want a different format, if you want YAML or JSON or whatever, or just a binary blob in there, you can definitely do that.
So in the service context that gets handed to you, it gives you the work folder, yes?
Yeah.
Which is just a directory of where that file is.
It actually gives you more than that. It gives you a pointer to the config package itself, and then you can look at that config package and get the file directory on disk, the local directory on disk. You can get the version, and then you can also consume events in C#. You can attach events onto that config package, so you know when it changes or when a new one is added or when one is deleted. So all that stuff is in that. If you look in your code, if you look for service context, on service context, there's a thing called code package activation context, and that has all the APIs for working with those different code packages, config packages, and data packages. Yeah. So take a look at that if you don't like being in that XML world.
And anything to go in line with that ASP.NET Core and that line term, or not yet? We don't know.
Not yet, but it's something we're going to look into, though. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
You got that last one? Did you just answer that, boss? But is it possible to use JSON application parameters?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So you wouldn't. Yeah. So if you had a JSON file yourself, you wouldn't be able to override through application parameters. That's a special thing we have with settings XML today, at least.
Okay, then I posted a link to diagnostics. That's posted to EW.
Okay, folks, since we have a little downtime, we're going to ask you to fill out a few polling questions for us. We'll go through that now, and then we'll come back and answer more of your questions as you post them in the chat window. That way we can keep this rolling.
Well, that means you can do this, and we'll think of all our questions as they're helping your poll, and then we'll have our what do we call it? Our 10-minute fast
The part where we talk really
Quick
fast.
speed round.
Yes.
Speed round.
It's speed
Believe me, we've had speed round. Well, maybe it's not going to be a speed round today.
Well, maybe we'll get it up.
Is it possible to use JSON and add parameters for overrides?
We just answered that.
Oh, okay, sorry. Apologies.
Well, we're having technical difficulties on the polling questions, of course.
Are there any more questions?
No, because Mark is going to post a survey.
Yeah, one
And meanwhile,
sometime today.
we're going to then dive into the quickfire round.
Oh, let's go to quickfire. I'll come back with the survey, but I can't get on to display for some reason.
All right, well, keep going with your questions then. Into the
Wonderful.
into the 10-minute round.
Just back to these containers. If containers are run as a code package, it solves everything for me, and I can use containers as well, and it doesn't break the application model, so everything is okay. So don't bother about the container networking and volume mounts and stuff. If this is this way, it's okay for me.
Yeah, the model is exactly the same. The difference is that in a regular code package, it actually contains your binary files inside of it, right? So those get copied around for you and you have to upload them. The only difference with the container code package is that you just have a pointer out to a container somewhere else. And so the container has to get downloaded once the package is activated. So that's the only difference. But other than that, it's pretty much the same thing. It's still just a code package.
We can talk about fun
Just,
features.
I'm sorry, I wanted to ask one more question about containers. Do you plan any caching of container images in the cluster? Because if the cluster loses connectivity to the image store, you can lose ability to launch code packages. So it would be really nice if container image was copied to the image store when deploying application.
We already do this caching. So
No. He's talking about two things. So we do local caching on
Yeah,
the
on the
physical
VM.
machine.
Yeah.
So when you download a container onto the VM
the VM,
itself, they're cached and kept there.
Yeah.
When the application moves away, we clean up all the images of the containers that are deployed there.
Yeah.
That's the only level of caching we do right now.
Yeah,
The container images themselves are not deployed into the image store.
Yeah, it's not deployed to the image store, but you have it on the VM. That's one. The second thing that we do is even when the container moves, we do actually let you hold on to the images and not delete them from that VM. So I'll post a couple of links in a minute.
Yeah, so that's what it is.
So a current recommendation is if you want fast failover, do a deployment of container to all nodes and then scale down to the actual node which you want to run, then you have it cached on all nodes.
Yeah.
But you need to do that in order to actually cache it. It's not in the image store.
I think it would be a good idea to keep those images in the container store because there are scenarios when you keep application types registered and you spawn them only on demand. So in that case, you don't have images cached on nodes, and it can lead to inability to spawn the images. It affects availability of the entire application. So
Yeah,
Yes,
that's right.
We hear you. Yes, I think today we hear you. We've heard this asked before. I think some of it has been container image size on the Windows side of things, and I think that's been But we hear you. Yeah, it's good feedback. Yes. This question here, is there documentation for networking on the container applications? There are three types of networking modes you can do on containers. There's the NAT-based one where you map a host port to a container port to a host port on the machine. There's one called Open where every container gets its own IP address across the VNet that's deployed inside the cluster. And then there's one that's coming in our next release. And then those two are there available today.
Yeah.
And then there's one that's coming called Isolated, which means you get a VNet per application deployment. So the application that gets deployed has its own VNet with IPs within inside that.
So you have to provide the IP from that, the VNet from Azure.
No,
No.
So when you say VNet, it's not an Azure VNet.
no, it's not. It's not an Azure VNet. No, it's let's just say
It's just a subnet within whatever
Yeah.
network. So.
yes, it's a subnet within. Yes, this is true. Yes, that's a good way. Yeah, you clarified it. Yes, it's a subnet within inside. That you, but it's just something you can specify within inside. So something you can specify, but it's still within inside the application context. Yes. So you, it's not. It's not. a sub-
Applications are tied to that subnet.
Yes.
Yes.
Application that's all.
Yeah.
Is that the doc, man? You just posted? Okay.
Yes. And right now, you can turn on the open networking node, for example, through a config setting that you set inside ARM, inside that document.
It's in that doc. Yeah.
And that's quite a useful one in that you get an IP address per container that gets deployed as it's run today.
How would you configure open networking on-prem?
We don't have open networking on-prem right now, do we?
We
Currently,
don't, it's only available on through Azure right now.
but it's, I mean, it's something that we will work on, yes, because we have a principle of trying to keep these consistent.
Yeah, okay.
Yes. So right now, those networking modes are only available in Azure. Will it be on-prem? Yes.
It's fun that I get to ask questions.
Okay.
Chuck, do you have any questions?
So there was some technical difficulties with the survey. We'll ask it this afternoon. So if you're interested in taking our polling questions, join us this afternoon at 4 Pacific time.
Yeah, is the isolated overlay networking? Yes, it is. It's the same as overlay networking inside of Docker. Yeah, it's the same thing. Isolated overlay networking, yes. Is it? As I say, I was looking for .NET. So we released 6.1 recently. It doesn't contain the isolated. It's in our 6.2 release coming up, which is we're working on now. Yes. Okay, so
We're in the lightning round. Post ask
Lightning
your
round.
questions.
Let's
5 minutes.
Do it.
Or we can just talk amongst ourselves.
well, okay. I mean, let's
Thanks,
talk about.
Marcin.
Here we go. Thanks, Martin.
I got it.
There was, I mean, one fun feature in the 6.1 release that I certainly think was a fun feature anyway was inside. There's not only Service Fabric Explorer that you deploy standalone now, yes. But there's also, if you go to the application level and you click on Actions, it opens up a little dialog box that says Deploy a Compose application, which is a fun way of taking an existing Compose definition and spinning up an application inside your cluster. Just from its Compose definition you have, so it's pretty useful.
Yeah, so if you're not aware, what we did with Service Fabric Explorer, which is the web-based management UI where you usually go to your cluster endpoint to load that, we now have it as a standalone application, so you can install it on Linux and Mac and Windows. It's a near to it has more features than what you have in the cluster, basically because we're able to deploy it independently of when we upgrade the cluster runtimes. But what we also did is we actually open sourced the whole thing. So you can go into GitHub and actually find the code behind that. And the plan going forward is, of course, we gladly accept suggestions to which features to bring to it. We also gladly accept pull requests once we agree on the features to build. There are some general contribution guidelines there as well, which are actually the same that we do across all the different open source repos that we have. So we plan to do frequent releases of new features for this standalone Explorer. And what you would see is then when we do a runtime upgrade of the clusters, we then, we dump current versions of that into the cluster runtime. So expect the cluster SFX to be a little bit behind for what we do in the standalone going forward. That's the one. Should be.
You can download it.
Well, the download links are on the GitHub page.
Oh, okay.
So once you get to the GitHub page, there's a README file with the download links. And just to clarify, that is a download link for Windows.
Yeah, that's right.
If you're on a Mac, it's a different.
I used that because I've got a Windows machine here.
Like, oh, Manny with his Mac. He must be Windows today.
Manuel's Mac.
Yes.
As he's, as he's come to be known around now.
I got a new name now.
Application deployment is awesome, great.
Arm deployment. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes, yes.
Yeah, so I know that, I don't know whether that was forcing us to add some more things. So it basically allows you to do simple things. Certainly when you start to doing diff provisioning and so forth, those are not available. So we have that as a backlog. We
Let's just say heavily driven by the usage inside the company in order to deploy these.
so, but it gives you the rudimentary RBAC as Marcin points out. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay.
Could you consider providing examples for path orchestration service with path orchestration application for our ARM deployment? It would be first of all, it would be a great example of using our ARM deployment, and at the second one, it is a good practice to deploy this application. So. I think it should be included in every ARM template for Service Fabric cluster.
It's a good suggestion. I think I have internal customers who've done it, so I just have to figure out if they will publish that sample. But great suggestion. Thank you.
All right, thanks everyone. That brings us to the end of the session. As we've mentioned multiple times throughout this session, there'll be a second one this afternoon at 4 o'clock Pacific time. So if you want to join us then, that'd be great. Otherwise, we're definitely going to record that and we'll post both sessions in Azure Advisors and on the YouTube channel. Great.
So Andreas, yes, there is some limited documentation on the application.
Sorry, missed that. Sorry,
There is. You should post a link. I'll find it.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Guys. Thank you. Stick around if you want the link.
Mark's gonna find
Oh, there it is. Marcin,
Marcin,
thank you.
Yeah, Marcin's good.
I felt pressure.
Hey guys, we're
Thanks.
cutting up here.